envoy to the United Nations Development Program. This all took place in 2017. And Nancy, the floor is all yours.
Okay. Great, I was able to unmute. Thanks, Alex. Well, I really appreciate this opportunity, and I am so glad you invited me back after we had kind of a debacle about 1.5 years ago when we had our date switched up. So I think I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. My plan today is to talk a little bit about pandas, a little bit about the global goals, and kind of where the trends are in global conservation of pandas. So let me go ahead and share, and I'm going to ask one of you guys, or how about we'll just do thumbs up. I'm going to ask you guys to give me some feedback that you can see the screen. So let me go ahead and share.
All right, we can see it.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Okay. So Alex, I've got a presenter view. Can you see the whole screen?
Yes, we can. It looks great.
Looks fine to you. Okay, that's what I needed to know. All right, so we're going to be talking a little bit about the history of panda conservation today. But mostly I'm really interested in talking about how that world is changing. Time is short, but there's some innovations that are happening. So here we go. Next slide. I wanted to start off by just talking about pandas. I think almost everybody loves pandas, and that's probably the reason why so many of you are here tonight. We are familiar with pandas because of Madame Chiang Kai-shek and the time in with the early Republic of China before our entry into World War II, when pandas were introduced to the United States. So less than a dozen pandas, I think a total of 9, were sent to the United States between 1936 and 1941. So they had just become a part of the American consciousness, and where America was being charmed by pandas. This was really an effort from China to reach out to the United States as a potential ally. So it turned out that a panda that had been given to the Bronx Zoo was became ill and didn't survive. So Madame Chiang Kai-shek decided that she would give 2 additional pandas to the United States. Those pandas were named Panda and Pandy. But the setting of this gift is a really important one. At this time, this was probably some of the most important panda diplomacy that's ever happened. China was under attack from Japan, and the United States was still out of the war. So there was a tremendous effort that went into getting these pandas to the United States. And in the photo, you see Madame Chiang Kai-shek and her American collaborator who worked with her to get the pandas to the United States and out of China through a war zone. So basically, these pandas were carried over the mountains through Burma, and then had a couple of stops flying to find Hong Kong and the Philippines, and finally they got on a boat. So this was 1941. The pandas were really, really precious cargo, and at as the story goes, they were on a small ship, and the captain of the ship was concerned about low-flying Japanese planes even seeing what the cargo was. So it may be apocryphal, but there's a story about the captain.
I'm sorry
yes?
to interrupt. We actually are still looking at your title slide here.
Oh, goodness. Thanks for telling me that. Okay, so I am seeing slide 2. Not working for you?
Not on our end. If you could go ahead and stop sharing and reshare your screen.
Oh, sure. Okay, well, that was a bummer. I will do this a different way. Thanks for interrupting.
That happens.
Okay, can you see it now?
We can, yes.
Oh, good. Okay. So I'm not going to have my speaker's notes, but that's okay. That'll make me be less long-winded. So here we see Madam Chiang Kai-shek. So in December, the pandas were coming across the ocean just as Pearl Harbor was attacked. And they ended up getting to the United States at the end of December 1941. So at the time, this was one of the greatest gestures that China could make, and basically an appreciation of what we had been doing in trying to support China. And they were sent before we entered the war. Madam Chiang Kai-shek talked about how comical pandas were, how sweet, how cute, and how beloved they were in China. The tradition, of course, continues with panda diplomacy. China uses pandas in many ways to promote Chinese interests abroad. But today, panda diplomacy is really a part of panda conservation. Okay, so I want you to ask yourself, why do we love pandas? And maybe why do you love pandas? There are probably a lot of reasons. One thing that is kind of amazing about pandas is that they're large, powerful creatures. They're bears. So with the powerful jaws and claws and teeth, and yet they have a kindly appearance. They're slow moving and gentle, and they're primarily herbivores. About 1% of their diet is other stuff, small animals and eggs and random things that they come across. But they're less threatening to us than other bears. I think one interesting idea about why we love pandas so much might be what psychologists call the quality of babiness. Human beings and some other mammals have an attraction to creatures with large eyes because they remind us of infants, and we're sort of hardwired to want to take care of baby things. So pandas have a lifelong babiness because of the black patches around their eyes. And that may be part of why we find them so adorable. Okay, so I'm thinking you all may be wondering, why are we listening to Nancy talking about this, especially if you know me. I saw some of my old friends here, Jim and Sarah are here. So why is a psychotherapist talking about pandas? My day job right now is serving as the director of counseling for Miami and Middletown. I have a background working at the Cincinnati Zoo and doing other kinds of conservation work. But the reason why I got involved with pandas is because of my interest in kind of the synergy between working on human needs and working to help wildlife. So it turns out there was a competition that was put on by the United Nations, a short film competition, and there were 17 of us who won out of lots of entries for that, and 17 people from around the world. And we became basically kind of tapped to be grassroots advocates for a particular program of the United Nations called the Global Goals for Sustainability. So I've got some of my friends from the program here, from Russia, Algeria, Lebanon, France, Japan, Korea, lots of different places, folks from Bolivia and Peru. I can't even think of them all right now, but it was a really neat opportunity to meet people from around the world who had the same concerns. So when I began this work for the United Nations Development Program, it became important that China is heavily involved in the Global Goals initiative. And China has contributed 2 pandas that are considered ambassadors for the Global Goals. And so it was my good luck that the United Nations decided that if we were going to be envoys for this campaign, we really needed to understand panda conservation. So we all got a ticket to China and spent time at the major breeding facility for pandas, the major research center, and kind of across the province of Sichuan. So what are the global goals? You've got them up on the screen here. Some of you will have heard of these and some will not have. So the global goals, or for sustainable development, or the SDGs, include major hopes and plans for the world in these different areas. So no poverty, zero hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality. And you can see the list here. We're working on issues related to inequality and issues related to the environment and life on Earth. And also peace and justice and reduced violence, and particularly reduced violence against women. And all of this work is being done with goal number 17, which is developing partnerships to make these goals work. So the goals are developed by governments, agreed upon by nations in the or nations within the United Nations. But to get them done, non-governmental organizations are key. Okay, so I want to show you a quick video about the global goals. I think this is about 1 minute, but it'll just give you a bit of an idea of what we're talking about. So you saw in that the global goals are kind of defined by the big overarching goal, but they also include benchmarks. So for example, under gender equality, there's the benchmark of having women participate at 50% in government, and reducing specifically the number of children who die from malnutrition. All of the different things that you saw are sort of the deliverables of the global goals. So, so that's my project, something that that I've been thinking about and working on for a while. And almost this language has become kind of sort of the critical framework for people who are working on sustainability at this point. So anyway, I want to talk about how the global goals relate to pandas today too. So one of the most important things that we are looking at is that the global goals can sort of interfere with each other. So one of the most interesting things or centers right now for sustainability research is at Michigan State. They're doing lots of different really innovative things. So they've pioneered using GPS technology to study pandas, which the Chinese government really resisted for at least a decade because they didn't feel good about collaring pandas, putting the radio collars around them. But anyway, besides that, they're also doing work about kind of making the goals work together. So maximizing the good that we can do and reducing ways that there are trade-offs between goals. So I'll give you an example here. We're talking about tourism. Certainly that can help develop economies and eliminate poverty. But we know that tourist activity can encroach on wildlife. Infrastructure development can encroach on wildlife. So that's an example of sort of the competition between goals. An example on the other end would be that research is showing now that there are real connections between some of these goals. So for example, where there's more habitat destruction, there's more gender-based violence. So you might think about deforestation in the Amazon and how much violence occurs there. In places where there are dangerous mining operations, there tends to be a lot of violence against women. So keeping sort of the lawless activity and abuses of the environment under control also helps with a different global goal. Sustainability is really a part, thinking in broad terms is a part of protecting pandas as well. So anyway, here's where we went to Chengdu in China, in sort of central China, in a basin that is kind of formed below the Himalayas. The Himalayas are, of course, to the left on this map, to the east, and there are some lower mountain ranges that are near Chengdu, and those are the primary territory now for pandas. Pandas used to live all the way to Myanmar. And actually they were from Myanmar, which I'm moving my cursor to show you is below China, very near Chengdu. But they also were found all the way to Beijing in northern China. But right now, almost all pandas are found within Sichuan province. So this is the place that you want to go if you are interested in learning about pandas. There are about 67 small reserves, almost totally in Sichuan province, that are working on salvaging habitat and giving refuge to pandas in the wild. So anyway, this was kind of the chance of a lifetime for me and a pretty exciting journey. Again, the pandas were chosen because we will look at this poster that says affordable and clean energy because there are pandas next to it. Chikao and Chishi were a pair of giant panda twins, and those are the two pandas that are the panda ambassadors for the goals, located in Chengdu. Pandas, as we've discussed, are really treasured in China. So there's sort of an ideal way to get the Chinese population involved with life on land issues too. This is a little sign from the Chengdu research base, and I was amazed by how respectful people were towards the pandas. The research base allows the public to come and visit, much like a zoo. And there's just tremendous attention to respect for the pandas. Okay. So I also saw a little bit of the cultural context in Sichuan, how important pandas were. At one point in this trip, we did some education around the global goals in schools. And basically, these are kids who are studying English. Their school was called Panda Road Elementary School. And everything about the school was panda oriented. It was astonishing. All the little signs and artwork in the school were panda related. There were, on the staircases to control traffic, there were panda paw prints showing which side you should go up and which side you should go down. And you see here a window in a classroom door that was shaped like a panda. So pandas are a big part of life in Sichuan. And in the school too, I saw hundreds of works of art by the kids, and it was really kind of wonderful to see how much empathy they had for the pandas, how much a part of their imagination pandas are. So there were tons and tons of sort of realistic efforts to document the life of pandas in the art, but also this painting on the right shows pandas as part of the Chengdu opera, sort of the traditional art form in China. So as if they're people. And I saw artwork of pandas in space and all kinds of different things. So it was neat to see how important pandas are to children and how heavily understanding pandas and caring about pandas it is incorporated in life in Sichuan. Okay, so talking about panda conservation today, these are the main things that we're looking at. In Chengdu, there is the world's center for giant panda research. The Chengdu Center for Giant Panda Breeding. In addition to that, there is a system of reserves that are focused on panda conservation. And interestingly, they're really focused on pandas and not on biodiversity. So that may be changing, but that's been an issue in panda conservation. Okay. There's also an effort that has become pretty serious to work on methods and refine methods for reintegrating pandas into the wild that have been in captivity. So the Giant Panda Research Base in Chengdu is the center of all of these activities, kind of coordinating panda conservation around the world. And in particular, they've done a lot of work in let's say their primary role is increasing captive breeding, but they've also done a lot of work in designing and thinking carefully about what reintegration in the wild would take. So anyway, this is where I spent most of my time in China. Through training for the UN, and then we did go into the field. We'll talk about that a little bit. But then I came back after the program was over and stayed for another 10 days at the research base, just learning about pandas. So anyway, those are the major things that are going on. There are NGOs that are really important as well. So I would say that the keys are these that are listed, the AZA stud book and the efforts around the world to contribute to the Species Survival Plan, the World Wildlife Fund, IUCN, all of these are really important. And there's a tremendous effort to get people around the world to care about pandas. Okay. So I would say these are the most important threats to pandas. I love this picture because it really looks like, it represents so well the terrain that we were in. And you can see that it's a wet area. You see the moss all over the trees. It's coniferous forest and sort of broadleafed deciduous forest. The area is misty, a dense mist and fog, and they're heavy torrential rains. So it's an interesting and kind of difficult environment for pandas. They live at elevations between 5,000 and 10,000 feet. So the area is sort of damp and cold, but they don't live at the heights of the Himalayas. This is sort of a more temperate zone. Okay, so habitat loss is the big thing. The fact that pandas just eat bamboo, basically, that 99% of their diet is bamboo, makes them vulnerable, like any other animal that depends on one food source. So when pandas live in an area without at least 2 species of bamboo, they're likely not to survive. So the health of the bamboo forests is really important. The other issue is competition between humans and pandas for land use. Roads are a big issue. Just like in the United States, where we have difficulty having our grizzly bears, for example, find each other and have safe corridors for travel. Pandas get in some trouble that way too, because humans have entered their terrain, sometimes with big and high-speed vehicles, and pandas also live really close to humans. So an important thing to know is that although China set aside, I think it's 67 reserves for pandas, those are all really close to human settlements. So that causes difficulties, and pandas need something like 114 square kilometers each. That's a lot of land, but for them to live comfortably, to not have conflict, to have enough food, that's how much space a panda requires. So those are the major threats. When we talk about reintroduction of the species, reintegration of individuals, there are so many challenges, but there are 2 especially big ones. Pandas are territorial creatures. They compete for very limited resources, and so aggression between adult pandas is a problem. And pandas who are released from captivity may be a little bit clueless about how those conflicts and territorial disputes get worked out. Basically, what we have learned is some humbleness at this point about the idea of reintroduction. We're realizing that there's just a tremendous complexity in what it takes to survive. So, for example, I kind of think about this as I'm an Oxford girl, and when I moved to the big city, I didn't understand how to read clues about where I might be safe, when I'd wandered into the wrong neighborhood. And I went to college at Brown University, and for a lot of the time there I lived in a Little Portugal neighborhood, which was run by the mafia. And there were all kinds of rules that I needed to learn about how to live in that environment. So one of my friends woke up one day and actually found a horse head in her garbage trash for her apartment outdoors. So she obviously, her experience opened my eyes that I really needed to understand how to live in an area with such a different culture. So I think pandas are a little bit like the small town girl moving into a big city and having to learn about how to live. So finding food is hard. Learning the unspoken rules of panda etiquette and behavior, all of those things are very, very difficult for humans to teach. So those are the basic issues. So there are some facilities that are kind of in between the research base, which has kind of almost a zoo-like appearance. We'll look at that in a little bit, but it's really focused on captive pandas. We have the focus on reserves, but in between are facilities that are designed to help test, explore, experiment with factors that might enable pandas to reintegrate. So this was my favorite panda from one of those facilities called Panda Valley. Right now, what we know about the reintegration efforts is that the results are very mixed. There's been some success, but there also have been panda deaths. So at this point, it's not looking like the salvation of pandas, although it's still a part of the big picture of panda conservation. Okay, so I want to show you just a glimpse of what the reintroduction efforts can look like. So I think I'm going to speed ahead here to my next slide. This is a trailer from an IMAX film called Pandas. And if you missed it, it is available now for home viewing. You can rent it on YouTube, or I think it's available through Amazon as well. But this will just give you in about 3 minutes an idea of what the reintegration effort is all about.
One of these pampered cubs is about to be chosen for the mission of a lifetime. Her objective? Help expand the wild panda population. Chen was born in captivity, so learning to thrive in the wild won't be easy. She'll need help from some unexpected places to discover her own inner bear.
Come on, guys. I don't teach bears how to be bears. The knowledge is already inside them.
Join the team of Chinese and American scientists working together to help Chen prepare for the wild.
Come on, let's go. Let's go.
Warner Brothers Pictures and IMAX invite you to share a journey of friendship, a struggle for survival, and a story of hope. Pandas. Narrated by Kristen Bell. Hey, that's me. Experience it in IMAX.
Okay, here we go. I want to talk about that for a minute with the film sound off. I cannot overly stress how true to life that little bit of film was. If you ever have a chance to visit China and spend time at the Giant Panda research base, it's just like that. It's the most charming place in the world. I could have spent months and months gaping with my mouth open, watching those baby pandas at the baby panda nursery. I stood there in the freezing cold and would just take a few moments to heat myself back up and then head back out to be with the pandas. So it really is wonderful work that's being done. Okay, so just a couple quick notes. I do want to give a nod again to the species survival plans, how important that work is to increase genetic diversity. It's really a problem among pandas. And you might say, well, yes, of course, they all are clones of each other, but they're not. There is some significant genetic diversity, unlike, for example, among cheetahs. I think it's sort of like golden retrievers. Each one looks different, but only to golden retriever owners, you know. So there's a lot of variability among pandas, but among the captive population, there really isn't. So one male, you can see her fathered 25% of all of the babies that were born in captivity, or all the pandas that are in captivity now. He was a very successful breeder, and breeding in captivity is difficult for pandas. Sustaining pregnancies is very difficult for pandas too. So conception is one thing, made more difficult by panda anatomy. And in captivity, male pandas really need to build their strength. They're given practice standing through different kinds of positive reinforcement to help with that. But they have trouble with mounting behavior, and females have trouble sustaining pregnancies. So, so genetic diversity is a big issue. At this point, a big part of the species survival plan is the use of artificial insemination and even frozen semen from long deceased pandas is being really carefully used to try to improve the gene pool among pandas. Okay, so the other big important work that's being done by NGOs, World Wildlife Fund, IUCN, is kind of looking at biodiversity and land management issues, water management issues, basically restoration of forests and creation of more kind of contiguous or at least connecting areas for pandas that are living in isolated populations. So, but biodiversity is, again, something that hasn't really been focused on in panda conservation. So the web of interconnections between species is really only now becoming understood in the work to protect pandas. Okay, so there's been some success in panda conservation. By 1970, there was a lot of damage to the panda population. In the 1960s, China began to protect pandas, but by 1970, poaching for other species, plant removal, and even sometimes kidnapping of baby pandas, all kinds of different issues were causing the panda population to plummet. And at that time, human competition for resources became really the biggest problem with pandas. So pandas live in very poor parts of China. Sichuan is a province with great poverty. Chengdu itself is a city of 11 million people. So when I landed at the airport at Chengdu in the middle of the night, and actually nobody met me, they were supposed to, but I had to figure out how to get across the city in the middle of the night in China. And the only Chinese I knew was ni hao, basically the greeting. So I was in a pickle in that big city. And I remember having a feeling much like being in New York. But just outside Chengdu is a network of villages, greatly underdeveloped, with high poverty. So China's economic inequality is really affecting pandas. And I would say that that work on that SDG of reducing inequalities and ending extreme poverty would be incredibly helpful for pandas. I'll never forget when we were in the foothills of the Min Mountains, the Giant Panda territory, just seeing so many very small, humble houses with very small and humble farming plots next to them. So people who are living more at a subsistence level. And yet, while I was in Chengdu, I was amazed by the number of luxury goods stores. So brands like Prada or Tiffany or gosh, things I can't think of right now because I don't care about that stuff. But anyway, the big luxury brands had massive stores, you know, like big buildings full of luxury goods. There were lots of poor people in Chengdu too, often in traditional dress down from the mountains. But the difference between the rich and the poor was just so vast. So people in the poor areas really do need to compete for resources and space to survive. And they come right up against the territory of the pandas. In fact, the reserve where we spent quite a bit of time learning about research methods with pandas, right where we parked our cars, next to that was a piece of farmland with trellises of kiwis. So just absolutely right up against the reserve. So it's kind of remarkable. But anyway, we know that despite all of these difficulties, we've got to focus on some of the good. And it is wonderful that pandas were moved in 2016 from being an endangered species to now being considered a vulnerable species. Okay, so in the wild, what do we know about panda populations? World Wildlife Fund did their most recent panda census in 2014. And at that time, we were approaching 2,000 giant pandas in the wild. It's a tiny number, but since the 1970s, it's almost doubled. So that is really good news. And the real efforts in panda conservation are just beginning in this decade. So I'm hopeful about this. In the past decade, you can see we've had a 17% rise. So, so that's where we stand. Traditionally, or let's say initially, the effort to help save the panda was done at the Chengdu Research Base. And you can see that its name is the Research Base of Giant Panda Breeding. So that's what the original mission was all about, making baby pandas and increasing the physical number of pandas. So we think about saving pandas differently now, but that's where this mission kind of began. Okay, so this is a map of the Chengdu Research Basin. You can see that most of it is forested. You can see there's some paths through here, and they're much like zoo paths, except that they're not congested. You can see that there are a few places for people to stop and watch and observe the pandas. Where my cursor is right now is the baby panda nursery, and the other areas that you see are adult pandas, juvenile pandas right here, and then there are two small areas for red pandas. Red pandas are not related to giant pandas. They're in taxonomical, if that's a word, group, their taxonomy group, let's say, is peopled only by them. So all the rest of the species that were related to red pandas are extinct. But giant pandas are bears. They, in the past, maybe about before 7 million years ago, we believe that pandas were carnivores. And around 7 million years ago, panda ancestors began to become plant eaters. And their lives changed at that point. Their physiology changed at that point. We'll be talking about that. But anyway, so the red pandas are there, I think, partly because they're cute and also partly because they're another treasured animal in China. Giant pandas are the national animal of China, although I would say that the snub-nosed golden monkey is also probably equally important in China. And you can picture it if you picture Kung Fu Panda. The monkey that was in that film is a good representative of the golden monkey. So anyway, this is the research base. It's designed to be pretty different in some of its areas from a zoo. There are areas, and actually where I have my cursor right now, this area is very much like some of the large areas at the Cincinnati Zoo. A big kind of moated area for pandas where they can do natural behaviors, climbing, eating and sleeping, or their major activities. But in some of these bigger areas, these are multiple acre kind of forested areas for the pandas. I'm going to show you some examples of what it looks like. Oops. Okay, well, actually, let me see if I can reload that. Okay, looks like only part of the slide loaded. But you can see this is the front of a forested area at the Giant Panda Reserve. I apologize, I think I opened an old version of this slideshow and we certainly don't want to go back, but the photo that didn't load to the right was a photo of a panda up a tree, because the design of this facility is basically tailored to allow pandas to behave as much like they would in the wild as possible. Okay. In the wild, pandas don't move a whole lot. This is kind of astonishing, but they actually only move maybe 88 feet an hour on average. So it's kind of amazing. They have almost a sloth-like pace for such a big animal. And pandas are about 3 feet tall at the shoulder, 150 to 220 pounds for an average female. So they're big animals, but they don't move a whole lot. They spend their time eating and sleeping. And for protection, even though they're bears and they're very formidable creatures, they prefer to shoot up a tree and seek refuge. So the Panda Reserve has like deep forested areas, and this area is at the very front of their enclosure. You can see at the bottom right-hand corner. Imagine yourself at a zoo where you can approach a moat, and then the display begins behind that. There's an area in the front of this display where bamboo will be stacked in the morning, and that attracts the pandas to come forward for people to see them. But they have a really large area where they can wander and explore and exhibit natural behavior. Okay, so one of the things, since we're here to talk about panda conservation, that I think is really important, the state of conservation today, is the new standard that we have for care. So there really has been what I would think of as a revolution in panda care. It's moved from sort of adversarial and very sort of human dominated to a more respectful way of dealing with pandas. So in this photo, you actually see training that was going on at the research base for keepers on the left who are there from a zoo that is going to be taking this panda for breeding purposes. So they're there to learn about husbandry practices. And really what they're learning about is operant conditioning and positive reinforcement methods that are used for pandas. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but they're incredibly impressive. Okay, so I'm going to give you like a little snippet of our experience. This is a super short couple-minute video, but it will give you an idea of some of the things that we did while we were at the research base. This is a couple of days there in a little montage. While we were in China, we had cameras on us all day long, except when we were back at our hotel. And I would say we probably had hundreds and hundreds of hours of video footage and, 50 or 100,000 photos taken. Our cameras were confiscated and our phones were confiscated because before we got there, there had been a bit of controversy about an actress who had been given access to pandas at the Panda Research Base. So there was going to be none of that bad publicity while we were there. And we relied on the government to document everything that we did. There was a lot of media in China coverage of the panda ambassadors. But after, as I said, hundreds of hours of video and gosh, probably 100,000 photos of really fantastic experiences, this compilation is it. So all of those materials that we thought were coming to us didn't come. I wish I could share those. But this is a very sunny and bright description of, or depiction of some of the highlights of what we did. So I'd like you to be watching for a scene with a panda grabbing a panda cake, a beautiful cake it's shaped with mooncake mold. And that panda cake is supplemental nutrition and it's sweet, so pandas really enjoy it. But anyway, we get to make panda cakes and we got to feed them to the pandas, which is a part of the effort to strengthen their legs and backs. So that's kind of a neat thing in here. You'll see me scrubbing a panda enclosure, which was actually tremendous fun, removing the manure from 7 baby pandas or juvenile pandas, 2-year-olds or 1 to 2-year-olds, and kind of learning about what it takes to do the husbandry on the inside for panda management. So anyway, you'll get a little taste of this, and you'll also see these people from around the world. It was interesting. The oldest filmmaker was in her 70s, and the youngest was, I think, 13. There was a young girl from Florida who was a super charming person that I kind of bonded with on the trip. But the rest of these folks are from countless countries, Mexico, Russia here, gosh, all kinds of places that I haven't even mentioned yet. So here we all are meeting each other and learning to do panda care together. Okay, so that gave you a little bit of a sense of the reserve too. You could see a little bit more about how it was structured and what it was like to be there. So in the displays. So, okay, I want to run kind of quickly through a little bit of information about pandas, and then we'll close up with a bit more on conservation efforts. So kind of the 101 of giant pandas, understanding them. So this chart gives you an idea about panda development. It's kind of an amazing thing, but when pandas are born, giant pandas, when they're born, they're very helpless. Newborns are 3.5 ounces in size on average. They can vary an ounce up or down, which is astonishing. 3.5 ounces when you think that their mothers are likely 200 pounds. So little tiny babies. And it turns out that it's not unusual for carnivore babies to be born with lots of developing to do, but typically they're born with full fur and their skeletal structure ready. And instead, panda babies are born kind of floppy and extremely undeveloped. So one scientist that I read recently described them as being undercooked. So they're kind of the equivalent of a human baby at maybe 23 weeks gestation, still forming. They don't open their eyes for about 3 months, or pardon me, not 3 months, 8 weeks, yes, 6 to 8 weeks, so 2 months. And then they begin to move and really be mobile around 3 months. So it takes a long time for them to resemble babies. So anyway, their cubhood lasts for about 2 years, and then they become independent when their mother conceives another baby. So typically, so that might be at 2 years or a little bit before that. And they reach sexual maturity at different ages, females at about 4 years and males at 6 years. So we know that pandas can live long lives. In captivity, the oldest has lived to 37, but in the wild, they tend to live about 16 or 17 years. So this is a little 20-second clip, but I just wanted you to see just how vulnerable the babies are.
It's a boy. Zookeepers in Belgium are celebrating the birth of a baby giant panda, an event so rare it's being described as a true miracle. The healthy male cub, which is blind and weighs a mere 170 grams, was born to How How at a wildlife park outside Brussels. He is yet to be named.
Kind of amazing. Okay. Gosh, there's a lot I could say about that, but we'll move on. The word panda means bamboo eater, kinda. It's a kind of an incorrect pronunciation of part of the Nepalese name for red pandas. So it's kind of funny that panda became the word that we use. Panda is not a Chinese word. It's not a Nepalese word either, but it sounds similar to ponya. I think that's a close to the pronunciation, panya, panya, similar to panda from Nepalese. So pandas eat a lot of bamboo. They need to eat 20 to 30 pounds a day in order to get the nutrition that they need, because bamboo is basically kind of like celery. It has little nutrition, and it's also very tough and hard and difficult to digest. I mentioned that pandas millions of years ago were carnivores like other bears, and they still have a very short digestive tract, unlike, let's say, ruminants. It's very inefficient for digesting bamboo, and so we think they digest less than 20% of their food, 17% in one study. Most of the food that they eat, they just eliminate. And pandas, kind of astonishingly, defecate about 40 times a day, dozens of times. And I laugh when I think about that because of my experience cleaning up after 7 pandas in their nighttime enclosure. But anyway, you can see in this picture that pandas have something like our opposable thumb. They have an extended wrist bone that enables them to grip. So that's kind of a neat thing about their ability to eat this particular diet. So pandas do have a vast majority of their diet in the form of bamboo, but they do eat other things. So basically, through chance, foods that they find, they may sample eggs or eat a small mammal. They do eat carrion, and they have a tendency to kind of forage and explore around the farms that are on the edge of their territory. Whoops. Okay, so yes, so what we know about giant pandas in the wild is gleaned from very few sources. When I spent time at the research base, which was located in this area, in this video that we're going to watch, the researchers who were there astonished me by letting me know that they had never seen a panda in the wild. And all of them, these were old guys who'd spent their careers on that nature preserve, national forest, and yet they'd never seen a panda with their own eyes. So camera traps are critical. You can see this is such a great shot of what the terrain looks like. You can see that it's difficult terrain. One part of the work that we did was climbing down a cliff. I am horribly afraid of heights, but I was there to study pandas, so this was the only time you will ever catch me doing such a thing. It was paralyzingly frightening, and actually a young Chinese boy who was translating for us held my hand all the way down the cliff. So anyway, the terrain is pretty shocking. This is the area, the kind of area where people get around using rope bridges, rope and wood platform bridges. It's really, really difficult. And this sort of loose rock is typical of the area too. So, so camera traps are really important. GPS monitoring is important. Behavioral observations like scat, scent marking, and then pandas will scratch on trees where they've scent marked to help bring that signal to the attention of other bears. Those are the things that we've got to work with from direct observation. So I would like to show you one of the fruits of camera trapping. This is real short again, but it's so charming, and keep watching until the very last seconds. I think you'll be charmed. Okay, pretty adorable example of mothering behavior there. Okay, so back to Pandas 101. Pandas basically do three things. They sleep, they eat, and then they do it all over again. There's not much more to their lives. They're peaceable creatures. And amazingly, for their size, they expend only about 45% of the energy of a similar sized animal. So very, very low energy expenditure, and they have a super slow metabolism. They need to expend so little energy because they take in so little nutrition. Think about yourself trying to live on something like celery. So they move slowly, they move very little, they forage, and then they sleep. So they nap for 4 to 6 hours at a time, and then get up and eat again. So to support such a slow metabolism, such little energy coming into their bodies have adjusted. So they have smaller organs. And then there's another interesting thing that may have something to do with why they're so sleepy. Pandas appear to have had a genetic mutation that greatly impacted their thyroids. So thyroid hormone levels are really, really low. Those thyroid tests that you may take at your annual doctor's visit, the values are really astonishingly low. So when we have hypothyroidism, we may feel more cold. We may feel more tired. And so hyperthyroidism tends to cause agitation, and in humans, panic attacks. In humans, hypothyroidism can contribute to depression and psychomotor retardation. So it's possible that the thyroid issue impacts pandas in terms of their activity level as well. Okay, so once again, this is it. Pandas are chomping or they're sleeping, and they're very content to do that. And the same is true for baby pandas. As I said, the nursery at the Giant Panda Research Base is really the happiest place on earth. It's not Disney World, it's this place. It's your face hurts from smiling so much while you're there. But it's really delightful in the mornings when the baby pandas go out and they're climbing and tumbling, learning to climb at the age that we see them here. And so they're pulling themselves up and then they're falling and rolling like little balls. So charming. But by afternoon, this is what you see. They're sleeping for many, many hours in the afternoon. This was a really cute little scene. There was one little naughty panda who climbed up and tried to wake up everybody else. First, he climbed up the tree to bother the conked out panda in the tree in the foreground. And then he climbed up and tried to fuss with everybody else who was sleeping on the platform. But in general, sleeping is just a huge part of panda life. So you'll see again too that at the research base, promoting natural behaviors is important. So there's some attention to creating spaces that humans can see and building rapport with humans. Getting humans to care basically requires us being able to observe the pandas. But there's just as much as an emphasis on climbing and teaching climbing skills to the babies. Climbing is really important for pandas' mental health, just as if you think with cats, their claws and exercising their claws and scratching is important to their mental health. For pandas, since escape by climbing is really important to them. They need to learn that skill, and certainly those in the wild will use it to survive. Okay, so as I said, pandas don't move much. They kind of lumber around slowly, but they can trot and they can run very quickly for short bursts. So picture a grizzly bear charging at someone. Pandas can, amazingly, when they're so sloth-like in some ways, they can make it up to about 20 miles an hour for short runs. So interesting. GPS collars have taught us a lot about panda preservation, or that we need to know about behavior for panda preservation. Turns out that pandas in the wild aren't diurnal or nocturnal or crepuscular, so not daytime, nighttime, or the dusk and dawn creatures, as most herbivores are crepuscular, so that they can avoid predators. But pandas are big, powerful animals. So they have 3 activity peaks in the morning, in the afternoon, and around midnight. And we think the reason for this is because of their need to take breaks, digest, and then continually consume more calories through bamboo, which again is so non-nutrient dense that they need to eat vast amounts of it. Pandas are most active in the spring, and that's because of mating. And females really try to bulk up in the springtime and then settle down in the autumn when cubs arrive. A few other adaptations that are kind of interesting. Pandas have eyes like cats. They have really thick fur, which may help with that sense of being cold. It's astonishingly thick fur. And I may have this elsewhere in the presentation, but I'll say here now, pandas also have amazingly thick skin. It is 5 to even 10 centimeters in some areas thick. It just blows my mind. So they have lots of adaptations for warmth. The area that they live is very chilly. It's in sort of a bowl next to the mountains, the really high mountains of the Himalayas, the low mountains they live in, but also the valleys there are very damp. So the whole time that I was in Sichuan, I felt chilled. And we were there in January to February, and it was about 50 degrees and wet the whole time. So warmth is important. A lot of people have speculated over the years about why pandas are either white and black, or sometimes they are brown and tan. And there's a particular population where that is concentrated. We think that it is a camouflage, and you'll hear people talking about snow and rocky areas, and we saw some of that, but actually it's probably most important in treetops. So I will show you an example. This is not a very leafy tree, and it's not a forest area. It's sort of an isolated tree. But if you look up, you can see how in a darker forest, a more dense forest, the panda really could blend in with the white blending into the sky and the black blending into the tree itself. If you stand underneath a tree that's very leafy, you'll see how dark it can be. So that's most likely the reason for the coloration. Kind of like if you look at fish, how their coloring is different for predators who might be looking down from the top. The top colors are different from their bottom colors for predators that might be looking up, kind of matching the sky. So, so I think that's the best explanation, but you can have your own guesses about why they are those colors. Pandas really don't have predators, except for predators of babies. So snow leopards in particular take baby pandas, and also jackals and martens can do that. One non-natural predator, I would say, is the dog. And that actually, recent research has shown that that is a major factor in the survival of captive pandas and in the ability of pandas to use the reserves that have been set up for them. So dogs tend to harass them in about 40% of their territory. So we're starting to really look now, the government is looking at taking steps to kind of separate the dogs that live around humans and travel from human areas into panda territory. Okay. Pandas mostly live alone. They like their peers when they're little, but they live solitary lives when they get older. Want to just talk a little bit about their communication. I'm going to let you hear the sound of a panda. This would be sort of a cheerful greeting, and pandas make all sorts of grunts and different kinds of sounds, but this is an adult greeting others. Okay, so that's kind of a happy sound. And this is a giant panda cub. Okay, so vocalization isn't one of the most important things, except between mothers and babies in panda life, but they do have calls when in a wide variety of different sounds that they make if they're negotiating territory, if they're calling for a mate, in different kinds of situations. Pandas are great mothers. They never let go of their babies during the first month at all, and then rarely put them down until they're able to move on their own at about 3 months. Probably the most important communication is scent marking. So they have glands that leave sort of a waxy, pungent smell. And I think about that as so similar to how our dogs, when we take them for walks, like to sniff everything and figure out who's been there. Just like our dogs, pandas can tell who was there, their age, their sex, whether they're ready to mate, their social status, and even the identity of individuals. So they have a highly developed sense of smell, and it's key to their survival. You can see here, this panda is standing on its front legs, and he is marking as high as he can. This is urination marking, so caught by a camera trap. The most important scent marking is related probably to marking territories and preventing conflict, but it's also really important that females ovulate only 3 days a year. So finding a mate in very short order is critical. Okay, and we talked about cold. So I know I'm running out of time, so just want to talk about reproductive challenges a little bit. Finding a mate, mating itself, as we talked about earlier. This is probably the most important change in improving mating success of captive pandas. You will notice a whistle in this guy's mouth. James Ayala, I think is his name. All of a sudden I'm blanking, but he was a super nice guy who taught us how to condition pandas. So basically, rather than old-fashioned methods like darting bears and traumatizing them, creating conflict and mistrust, American scientists and American animal trainers have been really, really important in teaching operant conditioning. So in basically positive reinforcement. So right here you can see he is giving the panda apples and sometimes honey as a snack, or other sweet things for pandas. But amazingly, we see them now able to, keepers now able to get pandas to cooperate with all kinds of medical procedures. These are ferocious kind of potentially creatures if they're feeling unsafe. They have big crushing jaws, sharp claws. A panda could kill you. But with trust, pandas now are allowing their staff to do ultrasounds on them without sedation. Through clicker training, this panda knows how to present its arm straight out for a blood draw. It knows how to present its shoulder for a medication injection, all kinds of different things. And even artificial insemination can be done without sedation now. So it's just a world of difference for the animals. And what we found is it improves their health, it improves their mental health, and their reproductive success has skyrocketed. So the other thing that's really important is the last point on this next slide. Pandas typically will have twins when they reproduce. And unfortunately, pandas will typically only raise one baby. So all of the rest of twin births, for years and years, one baby was dying. But now that we have these trusting relationships with pandas, those who are the keepers for female pandas can retrieve, reach into the bear's den and retrieve an abandoned baby panda. The pandas are also comfortable enough with keepers that they will allow the keepers to remove those little pink babies from their mothers, just for a minute or two to check their health, make sure that they're okay, they don't need intervention, and then return them to them. And you probably saw in the film earlier that panda mothers cover those babies with their heads, their paws, their arms, their claws. They're extremely protective of them. And yet now, with the respect and trust that keepers have with the giant pandas, we're able to help with survival in many, many ways. So the last thing I want to talk about is the importance of individual keepers. We fed the pandas, and this is one night's panda food for a group. This is the most important person that I met at the Chengdu Research Base, Tanda, Brother Da, who cares for both my favorite panda, they're Maosun, and 7 yearling pandas. So this is the morning after all of that bamboo was eaten, and 7 pandas have been pooping all night in there. And Tanda will keep it spotless, sanitized, and then refill in these vases at night. Sharp, cut your hands bamboo for the babies again. So this guy is like the international authority on caring for pandas. He's the mentor for people around the world, and he's revered by people at the center. So actually, I think I'm out of time. Alex, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you want to cut me off?
Actually, if you need a few minutes, we can keep.
Okay,
the,
anybody who wants to leave, please, I won't be offended. I got a couple of slides left about conservation, so I'd love to finish, but anyway, I'm mindful of the time. This quote at the top, Malson, I've never been so moved as when this gentleman, Tanda, was my mentor in learning to care for pandas, and he oversaw us. I came back and took these photos on my last day there as I was walking out of the facility, and so I was able to capture the scene. But we worked in these areas, and we're supervised by him. And I watched him working with this adult female panda who's now in Copenhagen, named Malson. And he had the most beautiful relationship with Malson. He called her when we were going to feed her some supplemental nutrition, and she came slowly and lumbering, but she came from deep in the forested area. And at night, when it was time for her to enter this building through kind of a series of chutes, as you would see at the Cincinnati Zoo, he called her as the sun was going down, and I just heard him yelling, "Malson, Malson," and she came to her friend. It just brought tears to your eyes to see that. Tanda lives in this building. So you can see this is the yearling enclosure. Outside the door and is Malson's area kind of going on down the building. And behind this wall, where my cursor is, that's where Tanda lives. He has a room to himself. And across the hall from that, there's a kitchen with a table and a sink and a refrigerator. And that's where he spent his life. So the dedication of these guys is just amazing, and the trust that is built is remarkable. I also want to say when we're talking about inequality, this is a striking example of where resources go. I was picturing people buying expensive sunglasses and jewelry in downtown Chengdu as I learned that this guy, the world authority on panda care and bonding with pandas, he makes $300 a month. So, and he lives in this building. It's just remarkable. So I will say that in case you're wondering, it's unlike, let's say, the elephant house at the zoo. One of the surprising things about pandas is their digestive system is so not suited for bamboo digestion that there's little fermentation or bacterial activity. And so even though they're pooping 40 times a day, and it was quite a scene in there in the morning with 7 baby pandas after they went outdoors, there was no odor. So at least for Tanda, he doesn't have to worry about that. It's a very interesting scene there, but stark, very basic living conditions, simple, and such a low income. Okay. All right, that one didn't work. So what's the result of all of that? I would say it's success. So mothers being able to successfully get pregnant, conceive babies through AI assistance and through lack of stress and very good health. And I will say too that, you know, the very good health is so dependent on men like Tanda, the relationship that they have and the great care and observation that they put in to being a panda keeper. But so we enable the mothers to raise the one infant that they want to. And then we have the ability to retrieve the other babies. And there's a huge nursery of baby pandas that are saved each year at the research base. So remarkably, there's a 50% increase now in how many babies are surviving. There's kind of a panda explosion. And there are those efforts to increase genetic diversity. Basically, pandas are threatened by habitat loss, and particularly by fragmentation of their habitats. So building corridors between panda habitat areas, corridors of bamboo that guide them to each other, are really, really important for finding a mate and having pandas not become isolated in sort of subspecies in particular areas. So more reserves are needed. As I said, right now 40% is lost to dogs and human activity close by of the reserves that are set up, so we need more. And I've talked about where they used to live across such a broad area, but I've mentioned too that there's a population of pandas that are brown and tan. They are in this area, in the Shin Mountains, and the Min mountain range here is the primary area for giant pandas. Okay. So NGOs are really critical in helping the Chinese government design these plans for corridors, for increasing reserves so that the rest of pandas, a third of them, are in safe habitats, and that they don't live on panda islands, that they're connected. The advances are important, and we are seeing that their habitat is becoming more usable as they're more protected. But of course, I don't expect you to read this, but this is my reminder to talk about land for pandas being one thing. But just as in conserving the snow leopard or the cheetah, so many species around the world, elephants, the well-being of people is really needed, not just because we can love our fellow man, but if we're talking about panda conservation, if there are not alternative livelihoods for people, ways to make a living that don't harm the environment, we're not going to be successful. So some of the same kinds of strategies that we're seeing in Africa, helping people be less reliant on cutting wood from forests is important. Helping them produce goods like honey production in efficient ways, sometimes like niche things like that are really important in inhospitable areas like Sichuan. And just like, for example, in Africa, how poachers have been turned into artisans, and people who might have destroyed gorilla habitat are kind of supporting tourism. We're looking at things like that in China and trying to do everything we can to make sure that forest destruction is done in a thoughtful way. So logging isn't clear cutting and that sort of thing. So, and ecotourism is done in a way that doesn't hurt the pandas. So that's about all that I wanted to say. I think that we're seeing growth from old approaches. We're seeing some improvements and very, very incremental change. But I think there's a spiritual element that's kind of key. And, you know, as we watch the climate change, as each of us has had our hearts broken by those polar bears, we have to fight in our minds to keep working. So here we are. This is actually a Buddhist temple in Chengdu, but I was very reminded that this is a spiritual matter too, to not not give up against high odds to save the panda. So lots of people are doing that in their own ways, and it's taking a lot of hands, but I do have some hope. I don't think pandas are ever going to be widespread, just as, not as they were in the past, just as we're never going to see large predators reintroduced in Butler County. You know, we're never going to see development rolled back here to the extent that we'll have many of the species who relied on chestnut trees and heavy forest and old growth forest like pandas enjoy coming back in Ohio. But there are things that we can do. And in China, the remoteness of these areas where the pandas live, the high elevation, and the low number of people that live there, relatively speaking, gives them a chance. So, okay, I really appreciate your time. It was so kind for one or two of you, hopefully, to stay, and I hope you get some sleep. I'm glad you don't have to drive home. But I will be here if any